everyone. I think this is the final session of the day, so it's been a bit of a marathon, I'm sure, for some of you. So we thought we'd get people moving a little bit to start off. So if everybody stands up for a moment. So we've got 3 questions.
We all doing it? Yeah.
Right, so first question is, can those people who have bought a pet in the last 3 years sit down?
What if you had a pet already?
If you've got a pet already, sit down as well. Okay, so it's probably, what was that, 50-50? About 20% or so bought in the last 3 years. That's great. Okay, if you stand up again for a second. So how many people, well, if you rent a property currently, sit down. So quite a few renters, maybe about 15%? 15% renters. Okay, last one, if everybody stands up for a second. If you've ever rented and had a bad experience whilst renting, sit down. Great, that's probably like 70% maybe. Great, all right, sit down. Thanks very much for that. Good, right, so this last session, we're going to talk about renters' behaviours, and how they've changed, and how the built-to-rent sector is dealing with that and where things might head. So before I show a couple of slides and lead us into that, I thought I'd just ask the wonderful panel to introduce themselves. So would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Adina David. I'm Executive Director at MGT Investment Management. We're a specialist investor in the residential space, primarily focused on a more mid-market rental product, so multifamily, single-family, but a bit more mid-market. I'll get into what that means as we go through the panel. And prior to that, I was with Greystar for many years and also spent a bit of time thinking about co-living, so I can speak to some of that today as well.
Hello everyone, I'm Tiffany Harrison. I'm Head of Lettings at Leaf Living. Leaf Living is a single-family housing provider, so we predominantly provide single-family houses. Relatively new to the space and launched our first development in July. Prior to that, I was at Housing Association doing the lettings and marketing for a portfolio of about 5,000 units.
Hi everybody, Ashley Perry, Investment Director at Apache Capital. Been with the business for 10, 11 months now, previously with the Cortland Consult team, prior to that known as Live Consult. In terms of what Apache's up to these days, we have a prime multifamily platform with Moda as our operational development partner, with mostly our institutional capital partners, Internal Family Office, Harrison Street, NFU, and KKR. So we've actually opened 2,000 odd homes in the last 3 years. So we've got a lot of live data on demand and certainly some of the really good stuff we're seeing from residents on the HomeViews platform, which I'm sure we're going to touch on as well.
Hi everybody, I'm Hannah Marsh. I'm one of the co-founders of HomeViews. HomeViews is the review platform for residential developments, and you'll all have to wait till later this evening if you're joining us for dinner to hear about who's won the awards this year, so there'll be no sneak peeks on the panel today.
Great, thank you. And I'm Tim Bannister. I'm the Director of Property Science Innovation at Rightmove. And I've been at Rightmove for 12 years. Previously, I was mainly in the States doing investment banking. But in my role at Rightmove, what I do is take the data that's flowing around Rightmove, and we're one of the top 10 busiest websites in the country, so there's loads of data flowing through it, and try and pull out insights that can help make property decisions, hopefully help make better decisions faster. So that's what I've been doing. And so what I thought I'd show you first, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the conversation, was set a bit of context about where we are at the moment in the market. So hopefully this will work. It's now not working. Can I send these slides forward? There we go. No, this clicker is not working. Can you move it forward over there? A couple of slides. Yeah, leave it there for a second. So what we've got here is just the year-on-year change in average sales and rental prices since 2007 to 2022. And if you focus in on that last little bit in the box there, I don't think it will surprise anybody that what we've seen is an incredible period of year-on-year house price growth and rental price growth. And interestingly, both moving up at speed at the same time. And we've seen double-digit growth as recently as the summer for sales, and still double-digit growth in terms of new listings. This is in the rental space, and I know there's some talk about what that actually looks like on existing tenancies. But in terms of new listings coming to our site, we're still seeing sort of double-digit growth. If we go on to the next slide, please. So another theme we're seeing here, talked about a lot, probably. I've heard mortgages mentioned in the last 6 weeks. I've never heard them mentioned more than they have been over the last 6 weeks. And we're seeing, so it should work? Okay, cool, thanks. Oh, one back, please. We go back. Yeah, so what we're seeing here basically is we've seen increasing interest rates for mortgages over the last, well, pretty much dating back to the beginning of this year. Obviously, there's been a bit of an acceleration in that in the last 6 weeks, although they have started to come back down a little bit. But that has meant that affordability, so the proportion of your income being spent on sales or on your mortgage, has grown significantly in the last few months. This is looking at first-time buyer properties and the average salary. So that's 0, 1 and 2 bedroom type properties and the average salary. But rental prices have also been going up as well. So we're seeing, again, affordability being stretched at both the sales side and the rental side. And lastly, can we go to the last slide? Got it, good, thank you. So one of the things we look at, just to understand sort of competition amongst people who are looking for their next home, this is the demand per property for the rental sector. And we've indexed it back to Jan 19. And what you can see is that in the rental sector, we've just seen incredible growth in demand, and not enough property to meet that demand. So in particular, this sort of accelerated through 2021, and it has continued in 2022. We have seen this easing in the sales side of things, but we're not seeing the same behavior in the rental side of things. So effectively what you're seeing there is it's over 3 times the demand for property that we were seeing back in January 2019. So that's a context that we're currently sort of sitting within in terms of the market. So lots of people looking for property and potentially not enough property out there for them. So within that context, I think it's good to turn to now the build-to-rent sector. And the first question we're going to look at, or the question we're going to look at is, who's looking for build-to-rent properties? Where are they looking and where are they coming from? And what exactly are they looking for? How has that changed over the last couple of years? And how might that change as we go forward? Where are the trends heading towards? So, Adina, maybe we'll start with you, particularly on the question of who. So, how has that changed? Like, in terms of where build-to-rent is pitching itself, people who wants a build-to-rent property, and how is that changing?
Sure. So I think we've heard a few stats on this today, so I'm going to try not to repeat too many things, but we are primarily focused on, as I was saying, the mid-market product, which we sort of called stress-free living, kind of looking to, and I think there was just on the previous panel on the stage talking about how in the US you have way fewer sort of schemes at the premium end, way fewer communities with all the bells and whistles. And they're great, and they're wonderful for the residents who live in them. But I think there's a bigger demand from the mid-market and kind of mid-income earners, and we need to figure out a way to deliver more of those homes as well. And I know a part of that has been construction costs being what they are. It's very difficult to make schemes stack at certain levels in the market. But I think there are creative ways to use modern methods of construction, interesting technology to deliver it within that range. So our attention is very much focused on figuring out how to do that, and that's working with delivery partners and designers, early doors, to create those schemes again for your mid-income renters. So we think the biggest kind of demand is going to come from that segment in the long term.
And Tiffany, you were saying earlier when we were having a quick chat about, obviously you offer single-family homes, and how have you seen who you're pitching them at, and actually what you've seen the reality of who really wants them?
Yeah, definitely. So when it's a giveaway in the name, I suppose, single family, we're predominantly looking for families, people with children going to schools locally. And whilst a lot of the customers and tenants we have coming through do fit that mould, we are starting to see increasing numbers of customers who are couples with no dependents acquiring 3 or 4 bedroom houses. So I think we are seeing a lot of families, definitely, but we're also seeing single people coming through, couples coming through into those family-sized homes.
Question, do you see sharers?
We do, but sharers tend to be 2 couples sharing rather than friends. We haven't had, we're relatively new. We launched our first site in July. But we're seeing 2 couples and things like that coming through, definitely.
And Ashley, you operate in the multifamily as well as the single-family space. So, what have you seen in terms of, where you, maybe when you started out in this industry, who you were going after and who was inquiring about your properties and who you were putting into your properties compared to where we are now, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, just to explain the other facet, as you said, on the single-family side. So Apache's launched Present Made, which has its first seed asset in Cambridge. Touchwood, hopefully starting in the new year on that. So not a great deal of resident demand data that we're getting, but obviously Cambridge is an unbelievably undersupplied market, so we think that's going to fly out the door, as we've seen in other assets across the country. So for perspective, the prime portfolio in terms of locations, so you got Manchester, Edinburgh, Glasgow is under construction, Leeds, Liverpool and Birmingham. I think safe to say, I can see Amanda in the general manager of the McEwan. Certainly the demand we've seen in Edinburgh has been absolutely phenomenal. And it's quite interesting when we look at some of the demands at an apartment level, actually sort of snippets of people taking slightly larger, not necessarily, there was always this sort of theory that residents rent what they need and maybe flex up over time. That's always the theory. You don't buy to then, when you're buying, you're sort of maybe going to move into that property or live, sort of expand into it. For the medium term, you sort of rent, generally the theory is you rent what you can afford and what is appropriate. What we saw in terms of some of the initial evidence from people taking a 2-bed as a couple rather than a 1-bed, price differential wasn't huge, and actually had a purpose-built room for an office. So there's some little nuances with that, which is interesting. I think just generally giving some sort of statistics on the demand. Obviously, Angel Gardens was opened by the team back in 2019 and then phased through to 2020. And then this year it's been, I can't even remember how they've all gone, but a cascade of Edinburgh, Birmingham, obviously Liverpool was last year, Leeds and Birmingham the rest of this year. So the demand, double-digit lettings per week, which is incredibly strong. A lot of that, as we've talked about before, is driven by the branded marketing direct-to-consumer team, as opposed to sort of necessarily competing on the wider market. I think the pressure on it's quite interesting when we look at our home view scores with the asset management team at the Motor Life Management business. It's quite interesting. Our scores are always fantastic on design, amenities, etc., and then value is actually comparatively low. And one of the things when we look at perhaps why that is, when we look at the value piece, when we look at, say, Edinburgh, it's an incredibly undersupplied market, so we actually score better on value because there aren't very many options. So it's a kind of a careful considerations to Adina's point around a more affluent audience that we generally cater to, with some significantly high earners living in our buildings. We've got to be very careful to obviously make sure that we're continuing to deliver that high level of service, which the team has. Obviously, still in lease up, we've stabilised Lexington. To give you kind of perspective on proportion of our international affluent audience for students, we do have 20, 25%, 30% of students in some of the buildings, which does obviously have a significant bearing on the demand profile, particularly seasonality on that as well.
Yeah, and Hannah, from your perspective, have you seen? I mean, obviously, Homeview's been going for for some time, incredible amount of data. Have you seen that change in terms of the types of people who are moving into these into build-to-rent offering? And we'll go into a bit later about what it is they actually want and what they value. But in terms of like the types of people that are moving in, have you seen that change?
Well, I think actually the data that was shared just before us by Sandra from Dataloft, we actually see something very consistent with that in terms of age demographic. Sort of about our last sort of data cut was about 77% of residents were in those sort of two younger brackets that we look at, from 18 up to sort of 35. So the majority still sits in that kind of key area, and we haven't seen that significantly change broadly. We definitely have seen a sizable proportion of students, and that's sometimes quite more focused on specific developments or locations, and you can see that whilst it's not a specific question that we ask, you can see that in the reviews and the commentary. We're now increasingly getting reviews and covering single-family housing, so we're getting more data on that, which is not so much about there being a shift, but more our coverage increasing. So we've got reviews from about 80% of the completed single-family housing stock. So we're starting to get more insights into those developments. But I think what's interesting also to look from a demand point of view, and whilst we don't have the size of the data that Rightmove does, in terms of the visitors that come to site and that are looking for data, about half of our traffic comes from people searching specifically for brand and building, and they're looking to sort of either reinforce the decision that they're looking to make. But over half our traffic actually comes from SEO searches. So people are actually searching for best places to live in a location, still very much driven by location and wanting sort of top rated. It's that kind of TripAdvisor mentality. I want the best places in a location that I'm looking to live in. So they're still looking for that validation. And actually some of our biggest search traffic's on blogs and content, which is very much driven from an international focus as well. We see a lot of international traffic now coming onto home views, particularly from Eastern markets. And it's around safety, looking for safest places to live, looking for affordability, bills included, which I think is something that's seen from your data as well. So I think in terms of seeing what people are searching for and what they value, it does often come back to location and value. It is still sort of those sort of key drivers.
Interesting. I mean, one of the things certainly I saw, I used to run our lettings business back in sort of 2010. And I remember in very early days, we started to have student letting, so purpose-built student accommodation on site. And looking through the inquiries that would come through, what I found fascinating was, even though it was very obvious this was student accommodation, we'd get actually quite a lot of email leads through from people saying, look, I'm not a student, but this looks awesome. Can I rent it? Mm-hmm. And sadly, at the time, I don't think there really was much provision of build to rent, but there was clearly people seeing that really nice, that nice offering. They looked great. They were advertised really well on site, and people were inquiring about them.
I think this is the story of co-living,
right?
As well.
Yeah. So
some of the big schemes evolved from student schemes, and just a lot of single renters living in large cities who find it unaffordable to live on their own. So they look for rooms they can rent, units they can rent that are at their income levels, and that is the story of the collective Old Oak, for example. So it's been an interesting evolution to watch in this market.
And do you think that evolution will continue? Because obviously we've had student, and now we've got build to rent, and now we're starting to get multifamily, and now we're starting to get single family. And so people they're starting to see that product out there in sort of in greater numbers. They're starting to increase their expectations of what rental can deliver for them. So do you think that will continue and will go into more and more segments within the market?
I think for sure. I think we're still small as a sector. I think the stats are still about 75,000 units, right, built, operational, versus 25 million in the US. Yes, I think the way I kind of think about the evolution of build to rent is we needed to have a very nice product to kind of educate the market on what it could be, what these communities could be all about. But now, we're kind of refining that product and iterating on different levels, of services and amenities within that. And then in terms of the demographics, even within co-living, we saw a huge range of ages and profiles of residents. Again, going back to my co-living experience at the Collective, in the first asset they had operational, 25% of renters were, maybe it was 20%, sorry, were between 35 and 80 years old. So, quite a bit above what you might think is the average age, which is 29. So quite interesting, to see that. And I think that will happen across all segments that aren't super regulated. Of course, you might have some senior living communities that are age restricted, and of course, student will stay restricted. You have to be a full-time student, etc. But I think it's great to blend communities and have lots of different age groups living together. It makes for better quality of life for everyone.
Actually, on that point, so in buildings at the moment, how consistent is the demographic in a building? Are we seeing buildings with lots of different types of demographic in it, different families, or is it you get one building and it's branded as it attracts a particular type of person with a particular requirement? What are you seeing?
On the kind of consolidated asset list, I would say it's fairly consistent. It's that sort of median age, late 20s, average income, about 20K above the median income in each city. That's just specifically for our product. And then consistent spend on rent. And then obviously we've got, to Adina's point, the age sort of bracket is very pronounced, aligned with the HomeViews data. There's no sort of anomaly that we've got a 10-year age gap or whatever between normal BTR audience and ours. It's very similar. I think it's interesting. Obviously the session is sort of referred to as renter behaviours, but also I think even to flip it back to you, Tim, on the portal behaviours as a conduit for discovery of property. Clearly we're still in the discovery stage for a lot of the BTR audience. Even having that kind of built for renters, I think your little tagline, I think even that was quite a shift. It was always one of the things that certainly I've talked to a number of different discussions over the last few years, where it's like as soon as the portals have a almost segment or search criteria, then we've reached mainstream, I suppose, and I think that's almost there. So I don't know if not to put you on the spot, but I'm just interested, is there any sort of awareness thing from customers going, hey, what is this? Or is it any stats on click-through on that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think sort of when we survey people, what we're seeing is that level of awareness is increasing significantly. It's, I suppose, exponential growth. Exponential is a word we've been using a lot over the last couple of years, haven't we? That's what we're seeing at the moment. As a result of that, we've made some changes on our sites about how people are able to, or providers are able to advertise their properties with built for renters, and actually, we'll go on to amenities in a moment, sort of, making it clearer what those amenities actually are, and the fact that this is a differentiated product. And I think we're seeing whenever we survey that just the level of awareness is going up significantly. We're definitely seeing it. Shall we move on to my clicker? I think we'll try and go on to the where question. I'll go past this. And this was, I think this was actually chimes with Sandra's points earlier today. We look at where people are actually sending their inquiries from and where they're sending their inquiries to. So we got their, when they're inquiring about their next home. And this is looking at that over the last, going back again to January 2019, and people are sending long distance inquiries, so 50 kilometers or more. And I don't know whether you can tell from the colours there, but I'm pretty certain that BTR is the line on top. So you'll see there that basically big move. It's quite seasonal in the rental market about those big moves. It tends to be sort of late summer, or I think it's August, September time, where you make those bigger moves. But in general, it's about 25% of inquirers are sending those 50 kilometre or more inquiries. What we class as a big move, and whereas it's about 20%, I think, in the PRS. So they are bigger moves that tend to be happening on the BTR perspective. It tends to be bringing in people from further afield, which I think chimes with the discussion we've had already. what I would also say, this is a little bit different as well. This is the area that people are searching. So I think once people have, so the top line there is the PRS sector. The bottom line is build to rent. And this is if they're going local, so under 50K, what's their area of search? So if we get the lats and longs of their different the properties they're inquiring to, what's that spread and areas that they're considering are ones they'd like to live in? So actually in this case, build to rent is a little bit tighter, or considerably tighter. I think that's because once you've found your area, found the build to rent place you want to go to, you sort of build to rent tends to be quite close to each other, and that's why you're sticking together on the build to rent side of things. But in both cases, people have expanded out their search areas. So I suppose leading on from this, what was really interesting here about from you guys is what are you seeing regarding where you're bringing people in from to your locations, and how you then address that. If you're seeing people, because what we are seeing is people are travelling further, and that trend is increasing. So how do you, are you seeing that? And if you are seeing that, how do you sort of account for that, or how do you lean into that in terms of how you attract or how you advertise to prospective residents? I don't know, Tiffany, if you want to.
Yeah, sure. So in the two sites that we've got, just to give a bit of context, we've got a site in West Sussex, and we're seeing a lot of customers coming from Worthing, Brighton, so the coastal sort of towns, and into Fontwell, Arundel. It's a small town in West Sussex. But we're also seeing people coming from as far as Croydon. So people are living already on the outskirts of London and moving further out. And I think that's a lot to do, equally in Essex, we are seeing people moving from East London. So we've got a site in Braintree, and a lot of people are moving from the East London location out to Braintree. So I think there's two elements to that. I think part of it is because, and this is purely anecdotal, but part of it is because a lot of people are working from home now. So there's less concern about being commutable into London because most people are working from home, which also supports why they're going for larger properties because of the home office situation that you mentioned there. But also, I think people are... Sorry, just saw a 10-minute sign there.
Yeah.
we've got 10 minutes. So, yeah, people are moving from the more outskirts of London into our suburban areas. And I think, as I say, a lot of that is to do with working from home, but I think it's also the next stage of life. So I think people would have potentially lived in build to rent in Croydon, in the East London areas like Walthamstow, the Docklands areas, and have started to think about what the next stage of their life looks like. And we're offering large homes with large gardens, more family-oriented properties, and I think that's what's kind of drawing customers further out into our more suburban locations, thinking about that next stage in their life.
Great. I'm conscious that we have 10 minutes, so I think something that's really seems to be top of people's minds quite often is amenities and the what. So maybe we'll move on to the what. So I did have this is the slide. Well, move past that. Yeah, maybe we'll go with this as a sort of as a teaser for the
Best slide.
Best slide. This is why we asked the question about pets. So what we're looking at here is the keyword. So you can on Rightmove you can key in the keyword, which will then give you sort your summary results for property listings that have those things in their property description. So that's what this is. So it's actually people going on and keying in these words. That's what they want to have in their property. And it's changed over time, and I think the key thing we'll see here is pets is really important, massively important for people. If you've got a pet, it's very important to you. But we've seen bills included go from being number 5 to being number 2. And obviously with a cost of living squeeze currently, that's not surprising. We saw balconies be really important during that sort of height of lockdown, and that's come back out now. And garden and furnished and parking and garaging is really important to people too. But yeah, so over to you. Like, what are you seeing in terms of those key amenities? Do we need to offer more amenities? Do we, or is it simple stuff like just allowing pets and including the bills?
Well, so we think these are great, and our focus on our particular type of product is on the top. I think when I looked at your wider graph, top 12 it was. I did have a question for you. Do you define bills included? Because it's such a, I think it's a wide range across our sector, and it's not actually common that build to rent, short student, yes, and co-living, yes, but I'm finding that build to rent includes
very few properties offer bills included, because
maybe Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is probably the most.
But they're asking.
Like,
People are asking.
People want
Yeah.
it. They desperately want it, and if you do include it, this is the growth that you know, it's the number one in terms of you've had the most growth in email leads for the properties that have that listed, but very few properties list bills included. But I suppose any suggestion around, or any sort of support that helps reduce the running cost for the renter or the resident, I would imagine getting close to bills included is going to be very well received.
Yeah, I mean, again, for us, and why we focus on this particular type of product is to drive down the operating margin, which I think, having operated buildings in the past myself, you have to do by reducing some of the services and some of the extras, which are wonderful for many, many communities. But in a cost of living crisis, you as a renter could probably do without. I know I've done without. So we were really focusing on how do you reduce that. I think, again, the previous panel just before us, we were talking about how most rental communities here in the UK, I mean, have a concierge or a presence on the door, which is actually super rare in the US, and except for a few key markets that have the more premium multifamily product. So, things like that. Like, do you need all the bells and whistles? Yes, sometimes, but not in all cases. And we think there's a big segment where you could do without and really focus on these key elements.
I wonder, Hannah, like, you must have some amazing data on this about what do people actually really value when they're reviewing stuff. Is it the fancy stuff, or is it the basics, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, I think there's always value from a marketing budget, isn't there? That some of these fancy things are always going to get searched for and attract attention, because we all like the idea of something glossy and fun when you're moving into your building. But when we look at our data, we actually look at the top performing buildings for facility scores, for management score, and we actually look at what facilities those buildings offer and what people are saying about them. And consistently, pet friendly comes through, that those top performing communities are offering that. Gym is always often featured, as well as concierge and a sort of events being offered, which is very much about bringing community together. Something that often makes us smile when we read the reviews is how many people comment on their gym, but also comment that they've never been in it. So I do think, it does come down to that sort of what attracts people, but actually what they actually value when they're in the building. I would also go back to the sort of that point about bills included, and I think something that we've observed and seen very much in the last year around that kind of cost focus is surety. And I think what comes across in the reviews of what people value in build to rent is this sort of being looked after, being cared for, this sense of security. And I think whilst we're not in COVID right now, there is an unsettled feeling for a lot of people. So searching for bills included doesn't surprise me if you're thinking of it from an emotive and knowing what I'm going to be paying every month. What we've seen actually more recently through a lot of reviews is a negative comments when service charges for owners are going up. It's something out of their control. My service charge has gone up by 50% and I can't afford this anymore. The cladding, or, all of these issues come up. For renters, pricing is at a premium, but if people can budget and know what they're paying for, if they can budget and know what the bills are going to be, there's a sense of security and safety in that, which comes back to a lot of what we see in the reviews on home views when they value a building. It's that surety, safety, being looked after.
I'm conscious we've probably got like 2 minutes left, so perhaps I'll go to Ashley, but with a final, and we'll go around everybody perhaps, and the final sort of question would be 10 years' time. We've thought a bit today about the who, the where, and the what. If we fast forward 10 years for the sector, what do you think the who, the where, and the what will look like for build to rent?
Good question. I think we're going to have, as Adina's pointed out, a lot more of the mid-market product. I think there's going to be a bit more diversity in that stock. I mean, we're already starting to see it. I always use, you take kind of a Birmingham, for example, versus Manchester. Everything's consolidated generally in Manchester, ignoring Salford for a moment, generally within the ring road. Everything's maybe 3 or 4 competing buildings to our Angel Garden scheme, but then you take Birmingham and you've got Digbeth, you've got the Heimstaden scheme, the other side of town, you've got stuff out in Edgbaston. I think it's a bit more diverse in its spread and actually the offer. So I think more diversity in product is probably what we'll see, and I think that's just a natural sort of stratification from the Class A, really high amenitized product through to more mid-market. I think that's inevitable, really.
Yeah. And Tiffany?
I agree completely with what you said there. I think we'll continue to see diversity in the product available, and naturally that will bring diversity in the type of customer that lives within build to rent. That's my view.
I think given the stats we've looked at today, probably a lot more renters, and renting just being an acceptable long-term or lifelong option for many, and therefore a lot more stock. But before we can deliver more stock, we have other issues to get through, like construction costs and yields moving out and topics covered earlier. But I do think we'll have a lot more units for rent in 10 years' time, hopefully.
I would add to that, and people might smile that I'll say this, but I think about reputation and performance. I think is something to add to the mix, because we can already see that in the reviews on home views that people's expectation is going up. So I think with increasing stock in build to rent, we're raising the standard, raising the bars. It's what happens in hospitality, and there's going to be more brand competition and reputation. So I think what companies and operators are delivering, the consumer is going to have a higher expectation on what they're getting given.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with everything people have said. It feels like we're going to see more and more of this product. It's a fantastic product. I think we need it. And I think we're going to see consumers and residents' expectations, as they see more and more of it, their expectations are going to be that's what renting means. It means this kind of product where they know what they're getting. They can plan for their future, and they're getting a good quality product. So I think that's where we'll be in 10 years, to be honest. I think that's our time. We're bang on. I've also thank you very much to the panel. Can I give them a round of applause?